gravity of the matter, we need to be able to quickly assess whether or not this report is true and what exactly was said. So, I am calling on the White House to make the transcript of the meeting with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador available to the Congressional Intelligence Committees as soon as possible. The White House should make the transcript of the meeting available immediately to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. And if the President has nothing to hide, he should direct that the transcript of the meeting be made available. The members who sit on those committees have the necessary clearances to review the transcript and any related summary of the President's meeting with the Russians. I agree with the senior senator from Maine that this briefing should happen immediately. Those committees would be able to help establish the facts before we grapple with the potential consequences. Last night, the administration issued several overlapping denials. Some questioned the overall veracity of the account. Some took pains to specifically deny certain accusations, but others did not. This morning, the President tweeted a version of events that undercut his advisors' carefully worded denials and seems to confirm that the reports that he had shared the information in question. Following so closely after Mr. Comey's firing, which was rationalized to the press and the American public in several different ways over the course of a week, this administration now faces a crisis of credibility. The President has told us that we cannot take at face value the explanation of some of his key advisors, but the events of the past week have taken this to an untenable extreme. Their timelines and rationales in the administration contradict one another. The truth, as it were, sits atop shifting sands in this administration. We need the transcripts to see exactly what the President said, given the conflicting reports from the people in the room. Producing the transcripts is the only way for this administration to categorically prove the reports untrue. Mr. President, there's a crisis of credibility in this administration, which will hurt us in ways almost too numerous to elaborate. At the top of the list are an erosion of trust in the presidency and trust in America by our friends and allies. The President owes the intelligence community, the American people, and the Congress a full explanation. The transcripts, in my view, are a necessary first step. Until the administration provides the unedited transcript, until the administration fully explains the facts of this case, the American people will rightly doubt if their president can handle our nation's most closely kept secrets. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Republican whip.
Mr. President, as I noted yesterday, this week we celebrate National Police Week, and in particular recognize and remember those law enforcement officers who have paid the ultimate price and have sacrificed their lives to protect the communities in which they serve. Yesterday I had the chance to speak about Javier Vega Jr., a Border Patrol agent who served in South Texas and was tragically killed by 2 illegal immigrant criminals. Today I want to talk about the attack on law enforcement officers in Dallas almost a year ago. Last July, about 800 people had gathered in downtown Dallas for a peaceful march. Given the size of the event, dozens of law enforcement officers were on hand to protect the protesters so they could exercise their fundamental constitutional right. Before 9 p.m., the event had been going very well by any standard. There wasn't any violence reported in the crowd, even though some similar events across the country hadn't been as calm. But in Dallas, it was clear that there existed a mutual respect between the citizens protesting and law enforcement. There were even social media posts of protesters embracing police officers in a show of solidarity and friendship. Unfortunately, the night would soon be robbed of any enduring image of that sort of positive scene. A man, someone who came that night explicitly to target law enforcement officers, opened fire, killing 5 officers and wounding 7 more. The deadliest day for American law enforcement since 9/11. The officers who lost their lives that day, Brent Thompson, Patrick Zamaripa, Lauren Aherns, Michael Kroll, and Michael Smith, will not be forgotten. They, like the other officers on duty that night, many of whom were injured by the gunman, didn't look the other way or run the other way when the violence erupted. Like the heroes they are, they ran to the danger, not away from the gunshots and the uproar. They, like law enforcement officers across the country, weren't about to shy away from doing their job, even if that meant putting their lone lives on the line. So today I want to commend the men and women of the Dallas Police Force, a group of men and women with incredible courage and unflinching valor in the face of danger. This Police Week, I'm particularly grateful to them and to the officers and first responders all over the state of Texas and all around our nation who count the costs and choose to serve their communities day after day, often with little thanks or recognition. As I said last summer, it shouldn't take an event of this scale to jolt our consciences into action. As legislators, we have tremendous opportunities to better support our men and women in blue who risk their lives to protect ours. And we have a duty to do all we can to keep them safe and to keep our society safe and peaceful. So as we celebrate Police Week, I hope we can each do our part to better support the men and women serving in law enforcement. Later today, I plan to introduce a piece of legislation called the Back the Blue Act, along with Senator Cruz and Senator Tillis. This is legislation that makes clear our support for these public servants who spend their lives protecting us and serving us. The Back the Blue Act would create a new federal crime for killing or attempting to kill a federal judge, a law enforcement officer, or a federally funded public safety officer. It would create a new crime for assaulting a law enforcement officer as well. Mr. President, there is no justification, none at all, for attacking a police officer. It is an act of anarchy to attack the very people who help keep our society safe and protected. We need to show that we value their lives, and we need to make it absolutely clear that we will hold those who carry out crimes against our police officers accountable. The Back the Blue Act sends that message loud and clear. I think it's important to point out that this legislation would also help make our communities stronger by allowing grant funds to be used for efforts to help foster more trust between police and the communities that they protect. This bill would better serve the men and women who work tirelessly in our communities every day. So I would hope our colleagues would join me in supporting it. We can do more to protect and support our law enforcement officers, and we can start with the Back the Blue Act to do just exactly that. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Good morning.
Mr. President, before I begin my remarks, I would like to commemorate National Police Week and the lives and sacrifices of 2 extraordinary Massachusetts law enforcement officers who fell in 2016. Thomas Clardy a trooper with the Massachusetts State Police, and Ronald Tarantino, a police officer with the Auburn Police Department. Their names will be inscribed on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial here in Washington, D.C., in honor of their service. By the end of this year, more than 21,000 names will be on that wall. We will never forget their service and sacrifice to our communities and to our country. And with the help of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, we pledge to their families and loved ones that they will have the support and resources which they need. I rise to speak about President Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey. In and of itself, this action by President Trump is seismic and has shaken the very foundation of our government, and I dare say, our democracy. But just yesterday, the American people were also, once again, confronted by presidential actions that raised both alarm and the need for investigation. In a news story, the Washington Post reported that President Trump revealed highly sensitive, classified material to senior Russian officials during a meeting last week. According to the Post story, President Trump reportedly revealed information about ISIS that could compromise a partner country's key intelligence sources and enable Russia to, according to the story, identify our sources and techniques. For gathering intelligence, there could be no greater compromise of American security. The information that President Trump revealed was so sensitive that the United States had previously refrained from sharing it even with our allies. President Trump's decision to relay some of our most sensitive intelligence with representatives of the Russian government betrays an astounding lack of judgment. By revealing what is called code word information to Russia, President Trump may have compromised key intelligence sources, endangered the fight against ISIS, and undermined the trust of our international partners. While the president may have the authority to declassify U.S. intelligence, it is imperative to the safety of our military and intelligence personnel and those of our partners that he do so through a careful and deliberative process. There is no evidence that Donald Trump did that. Congress must immediately investigate this irresponsible action and take steps to ensure that President Trump does no additional damage to U.S. national security in his dealings with Russia. This dangerous behavior comes on the heels of the president's reckless decision to fire former FBI Director James Comey, pushing our country ever closer to a constitutional crisis. President Trump's firing of Mr. Comey is disturbingly reminiscent of Watergate's Saturday Night Massacre, when our Constitution was last subject to an executive branch-induced stress test. Then President Nixon fired independent prosecutor Archibald Cox, who was leading the investigation into the Watergate scandal and the Nixon campaign's involvement in it. Now, President Trump has fired his FBI director, who was leading the investigation into the Russian interference scandal and the Trump campaign's involvement in it. Mark Twain is purported to have said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. Unfortunately, there is no humor in President Trump's actions. At first, we were supposed to believe that the president fired Director Comey because of the way he handled the investigation of Hillary Clinton's email server, which was unfair to her. That was what President Trump sent his staff out to tell the press and the American people. The official White House statement from Press Secretary Sean Spicer on May 9th said that President Trump acted based on the clear recommendation of both Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. That was a reference to the now infamous memorandum by Attorney General Sessions, prepared by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, which cited Comey's, quote, handling of the conclusion of the investigation of Secretary Clinton's emails as the reason why the public purportedly had lost confidence in the FBI, and on which Attorney General Sessions based his recommendation to the president that he fire Mr. Comey. On May 9th, Counselor to the President Kellyanne Conway said that President Trump, quote, took the recommendation of his Deputy Attorney General who oversees the FBI. Then, on May 10th, Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the president, quote, took the recommendation seriously and he made a decision based on that. Even Vice President Pence said that President Trump's decision to fire Comey was based on the Rosenstein memo. So the American people were being told to believe that President Trump took the unprecedented step of firing the FBI director in the midst of an investigation of the Trump campaign because James Comey was too hard on Hillary Clinton. That simply didn't pass the laugh test. Who can forget that candidate Trump repeatedly called her crooked Hillary Clinton throughout the campaign? Who can forget that candidate Trump applauded Director Comey for the way he handled the Clinton investigation? At the end of October of 2016, just days before the election, and after Comey had reopened the Clinton email investigation, Trump said that Comey had, quote, guts and had brought back his reputation. But it took only one day after Mr. Comey's firing for President Trump to himself admit that reason was utterly, utterly false. In an interview, President Trump said that Rosenstein made a recommendation, but regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey knowing that there was no good time to do it. So much for the Rosenstein memo, so much for the White House press statement, so much for what Kellyanne Conway said, so much for the words of the Vice President of the United States. And if that admission wasn't enough, President Trump went on to tell everyone what was on his mind when he made that decision. Here's his quote. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won. President Trump's statements about the Russia investigation are, of course, untrue. There's nothing made up about the conclusions of the intelligence community that Russia interfered with our election. The allegations of the Trump campaign's collusion with the Russians are serious. That's why the FBI and the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have been investigating them. So contrary to what the White House senior administration officials and the president, in fact, admitted that he fired the director of the FBI precisely because he was overseeing an investigation of the Trump campaign and its ties to Russia. And according to all of these various reports, the president did so just after Director Comey had gone to Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and asked for more resources for the Russia investigation. The firing of James Comey now brings the number of law enforcement officials who were investigating the Trump campaign or his administration when they themselves were fired to 3. First, Manhattan U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, and now Director Comey. President Trump himself, in his termination letter to Comey, not only made no mention of the Clinton email investigation, but instead expressly linked the firing to the Russian investigation. Trump claimed that he fired Comey despite Comey having informed the president on 3 separate occasions that he was not under investigation, a claim that has not been substantiated. Here's the plain and simple truth. President Trump feared that the FBI investigation into his campaign's possible collusion with Russia was getting too close for comfort, so he fired Director Comey. Comey's firing could be nothing less than obstruction of justice, masquerading as a personnel action. It's what impeding a federal investigation looks like. It's what an assault on the rule of law looks like. If there is one lesson that President Trump should have learned from Watergate, it is this. If you're under investigation, don't fire the investigator. But as disturbing as Mr. Comey's firing is, it gets worse. Days after President Trump tweeted a veiled threat, one that smacked of witness intimidation, here's the quote: "James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press." Are there recordings? We don't know yet. But if there are, the White House and Justice Department must ensure that they are preserved. It's clear that President Trump did not learn any of the lessons of Watergate, which only underscores the need for a special prosecutor independent of the White House and Justice Department to get to the bottom of this. The role of a special independent prosecutor is to follow all the facts wherever they lead. And that individual needs to be as far away from the White House as possible. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein should not be the one to appoint a special prosecutor. Just 3 weeks on the job, Mr. Rosenstein is now compromised by the questions swirling around his role in the Comey firing. Did Comey meet with Rosenstein and ask for more resources for the Russia investigation? Why did Rosenstein discuss the removal of Director Comey with Attorney General Sessions after Sessions had recused himself from the Russia investigation? And why didn't Rosenstein question Sessions' involvement? The magnitude of the decision to appoint a special counsel in these circumstances cannot be made by a political appointee. Instead, I join Minority Leader Schumer's call that the appointment must be made by the highest-ranking career civil servant in the Justice Department, someone insulated from politics and the White House. And until we have an independent special prosecutor appointed, we should not move forward with the confirmation of any replacement for James Comey as director of the FBI. Additionally, Director Comey should come and testify before Congress, which both Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Burr and Vice Chairman Warner have already requested, clearly showing the bipartisan support for this. There are too many unanswered questions that only Director Comey can answer. And finally, while it has been announced that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein will brief all senators and answer their questions, we must still hear from Attorney General Sessions. We must not lose sight of the fact that a foreign power interfered in our last presidential election and that the Trump campaign may have colluded with it to win the White House. This strikes at the heart of our government and our very democracy. Our elections must be fair and free of foreign interference. It is time for both Democrats and Republicans to put love of country ahead of party, to come together and demand the appointment of a special prosecutor who will investigate and follow the facts no matter where they lead. And I would like to conclude my remarks today by expressing my opposition to the nomination of Jeffrey Rosen to be Deputy Secretary of Transportation. Mr. Rosen has a long history, both in government and in the private sector, of defending private industry against regulations designed to protect the American public. When he first worked for the Department of Transportation, he touted the fact that he was involved in ending or withdrawing 180 potential transportation department rulemakings. He has also been hostile to environmental regulations designed to protect our air and water. He has opposed greenhouse gas emissions regulations in his role at the Office of Management and Budget, and personally represented the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in attempting to undermine climate change science in order to fend off potential regulations. Mr. Rosen's firm represented the Alliance for the Automobile Manufacturers and other auto groups against California overrules meant to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase non-polluting vehicles. I will vote no on Mr. Rosen's nomination because our automobile safety, environment, and clean energy future is just too important, and I urge my colleagues to join me. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last week the American people were stunned by what we learned happened in the White House. We saw an alarming set of developments about how this president is handling the investigation into Russia's interference with our democracy. Last Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee heard testimony from Sally Yates, who President Trump had asked to serve as acting Attorney General when he was first sworn into office. Ms. Yates testified that soon after the inauguration, she twice visited White House counsel Don McGahn to warn him about National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. She warned that General Flynn had been compromised by his secret communications with Russian Ambassador Kislyak and that General Flynn could be blackmailed. Ms. Yates first visited the White House counsel McGahn on January 26. McGahn invited her back to ask follow-up questions the following day on January 27. Those follow-ups included questions about General Flynn's potential criminal exposure. What else happened on January 27th? The President of the United States brought in FBI Director James Comey for a one-on-one dinner where he reportedly asked Director Comey for a pledge of loyalty. Is the timing of this Comey dinner curious? You bet it is. According to Press Secretary Sean Spicer, President Trump was briefed immediately by White House counsel McGahn after Ms. Yates' warning. That means the president knew about the Justice Department's concerns with Flynn when he met Director Comey for dinner. Was the president's request for loyalty from Director Comey an attempt to impede the Justice Department's investigation into General Flynn? Was it an effort by the president to inoculating himself from Russian-related investigations? These are unanswered questions. But when Director Comey reportedly refused to swear his loyalty to President Trump, he apparently sealed his fate as director of the FBI. Last Tuesday evening, President Trump fired Director Comey while Comey was giving a speech to FBI agents in Los Angeles. The reason? Well, on Thursday, the president made clear that the Russian investigation was on his mind when he fired Director Comey. He said to Lester Holt of NBC, and I quote, "When I decided to do it, I said to myself, you know, this Russian thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story," end of quote. President Trump later said that the Russia investigation was, quote, "should be over with, in my opinion. Should have been over a long time ago," end of quote. Then on Friday, the president found time to threaten Mr. Comey on Twitter, implying that he had taped their conversations and that he would release the tapes if Comey disclosed what he knew. Let's be clear, the president is in dangerous territory here. What the president is doing when it comes to potential obstruction of justice is similar to a chapter in history many of us remember. President Nixon, on October 20th, 1973, fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox when his Watergate investigation got too close to the White House. That sparked a constitutional crisis in America. And now we've learned that President Trump has disclosed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister and that same Ambassador Kislyak. The Washington Post reported that the president specifically revealed extremely sensitive intelligence, considered so sensitive that details were being withheld from America's allies and tightly restricted even within our own government. Last night, the White House denied this happened. This morning, however, President Trump confirmed in two separate tweets that the story was true. This kind of disclosure is what former Director Comey and just about every other congressional Republican described last year as, quote, extremely reckless, close quote, in the handling of classified information. It jeopardizes critical intelligence sources in the fight against ISIL and the broader fight by America against terrorism. This morning, European officials reacted, told the Associated Press that at least one European country might stop sharing intelligence with the United States if this is how it's going to be treated. That is not, as Majority Leader described it this morning, quote, drama, close quote. This is a real consequence of a dangerous president putting American lives at risk. This is truly incredible and historic. It is a national security breach by the president of incredible proportions. How in the world can we trust the president to put the national security needs of the American people ahead of his own? There are a lot of parallels between the Watergate era and what we see today. But one major difference from the Nixon era to the Trump era is the willingness of Republicans in Congress to speak out against the abuse of power and to actually serve as a check on the presidency. Back in Nixon's day, there were Republicans in Congress who were willing to speak truth to power, to say enough of the lies and damage to our democratic institutions and to put the country ahead of party. Listen, in November of 1973, just a few weeks after the Saturday Night Massacre, Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts was one of the first Republicans to stand up saying he did not feel the country could, quote, stand the trauma that it's been through for the past few months, close quote. In July of 1974, Republican Congressman Lawrence Hogan of Maryland said, and I quote, excuse me, the evidence convinced me that my president has lied repeatedly, deceiving public officials and the American people. Do we want to be the party loyalists who, in ringing rhetoric, condemn the wrongdoings and scandals of the Democratic Party and excuse them when they're done by Republicans? On the same day, Republican Congressman William Cohen of Maine said, quote, I've been faced with the terrible responsibility of assessing the conduct of a president that I voted for, believed to be the best man to lead this country, who has made significant and lasting contributions towards securing peace in this country and throughout the world. But a president who in the process, by act or acquiescence, allowed the rule of law and the Constitution to slip under the boots of indifference and arrogance and abuse, end of quote. Republican Congressman from Virginia, M. Caldwell Butler said, quote, for years, we Republicans have campaigned against corruption and misconduct, but Watergate is our shame, end of quote. And Republican Congressman Paul Findley of Illinois, whom I ran against when I first had the privilege to serve in the House, and who today I call a friend, said a month later, and I quote, hearings of the Judiciary Committee and developments in the courts have, I believe, clearly established gross negligence, maladministration, and moral insensitivity on the part of the president, end of quote. That same month, Republican Senator Barry Goldwater from Arizona said, and I quote, there are only so many lies you can take, and now there's been one too many, end of quote. In fact, at the same time, Senate Republicans nominated Goldwater to deliver a direct message to President Nixon. Goldwater, along with House Republican leader John Jacob Rhodes and Senate Republican leader Hugh Scott, went to the White House, sat directly in front of President Nixon's desk, and explained that enough was enough. Mr. President, these courageous Republicans were, of course, talking about lies, corruption, obstruction of justice, and danger to our democratic system of government emanating from the Nixon White House. They took our oath of office to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and certainly above a party or short-term policy gain. They took it seriously. And to their courage, we in history owe them a debt of gratitude. So I ask today, amid a swirling of deeply troubling mix of lies, nearly 500 in the first 100 days of this new presidency, obfuscation, withholding of information, attempts to interfere with federal investigations regarding possible collusion with a foreign adversary, thinly veiled threats against those involved in such investigations by our current president. Where are the many Republican patriots who are ready to stand up against these troubling abuses and threats? Mr. President, it's now been more than 7 months since 17 of our intelligence agencies provided overwhelming evidence of a Russian attack on our democracy and an attempt to help elect someone seen as more favorable to their interest, not our interest. The evidence was damning and continues to emerge. And yet, what has this Congress done during this same 7-month period to uphold our oath to, quote, support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic? Have congressional Republicans launched an independent investigation into this historic cyber act of war, as we did after 9/11? Unfortunately, no. Have congressional Republicans retaliated against Russia for its actions by imposing sanctions or taking other actions, making sure its leadership knows it will pay a price for such attacks and think twice before doing it again in the United States or at the expense of our allies? No. Have Republicans in Congress passed meaningful cybersecurity legislation to help protect America against future attacks and help any states that request help? No. Have Republicans demanded the appointment of a special prosecutor and insisted that the White House turn over all documents regarding the Trump campaign and ties with Russia, including potentially Russian intelligence? No. Have Republicans demanded that the president explain why he keeps denying Russia's attack on our election in the face of overwhelming evidence? No. In fact, has the majority party done anything to respond to, protect against, or even address these troubling attacks and refusals to cooperation from the White House? Sadly, no. But let me tell you what the majority party has found time to pursue during the 7 months after an attack on our nation, a cyber act of war that will live in cyber infamy. Some of this you simply can't make up. The Republican majority in the House and in the Senate passed legislation making it easier to kill baby bear cubs and their mothers in their dens, making it easier to work with corrupt regimes overseas, making it harder for Americans to save for their retirement, and are trying to strip health care away from millions of Americans in order to pay tax cuts for the wealthiest people in America. Mr. President, this is quite simply an abdication of the majority party's responsibility in Congress to address an attack by a foreign power on our nation and investigate possible collusion by an erratic and sometimes deceptive White House. So, Mr. President, let me close again by asking my Republican colleagues, whom I know care very deeply about the Senate and our nation, when will you speak up about the travesty unfolding? When will you take even a fraction of the action that will most certainly occur if these outrages had occurred under a Democratic president? We need Republicans in Congress to stand up and protect our democratic institutions and to support a special prosecutor and an independent investigation into the Russian election interference now. I am hopeful that Republican senators, some, will have the courage to join us in calling for a special prosecutor. We need someone above politics and above the current controversy whom we can trust to really pursue the facts and the evidence wherever they may lead, to determine what we can do to protect America from another Russian attack in our next election, and to hold Russia accountable for what we have been through. It is time to do this on a bipartisan basis. America is waiting. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
If no one seeks recognition, time will be charged equally to both sides.
Then that sets a precedent where people here. If you do it, approach right there, then see if they'll allow that. I know they allow that. Everybody to stagger, not constantly to get this job.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you're waiting on the
I don't think that's too long. I think that's Maybrook.
Is it major?
You know, man.
Yes. I think we made it.
Good.
Vicky, that's too long.
I'm just taking up the space while I got you. Okay. Are we hanging out? We're going to drink and re-up. This was here yesterday. I just wanted to
Yeah. Another term some cheese. No, so I think I could have just been involved. Yeah. Okay. We can't look. We can't look.
There's always something. You get there and go, actually, it was 2 in the morning. So you got to get brush teeth. 18 hours. I lost my suitcase between Tel Aviv and Poland and Warsaw, at the Marriott in Warsaw. I ended up in Newfoundland, Canada. 2 weeks later, I'm at the Long Beach in Miami Beach. I get a call. No line. It's Amtrak. Amtrak. And they go, "You put your guest room card in your suitcase." People with this airline found your guest room card in your suitcase. 2 years also. They're telling me that you found your suitcase. Yeah. Most of the stuff is very easy. By then, or the roses. Go figure, yeah. Don't feel not true. I don't want to relive that one. That was not a good experience. I had to go to the shopping mall. Unfortunately, there was a shopping mall across the street from the Marriott, where I was able to do all of it. But it was sort of like all these Euro style. There was not TV She put it on her blog.
Yeah, but I started
that's very get to know Hillary. Secret Service, yeah. Yeah, I got you. I didn't go at all. Yeah. But you can, I heard they don't do anything. They do? I heard it.
anything that was in that original water.
Okay. All right. Okay. Maybe they were talking about.
The fact that you have a number of Republican senators.
All right, so that's the number.
What you get for shooting
that they're facing right now, trying to prove that the Republican agenda.
That's working out.
That's how we started the conversation last week when we pushed the Senate to try to get a bill on the and now that is really overtaken by this crisis, controversy over the firing of former FBI Director James Comey. The Republicans clearly feel frustrated that their agenda has largely been stalled because of these various crises that are coming out of the White House. So H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, will be answering questions about all of that when it comes to the podium in just a few minutes from now. Hey, Jeff.
Yes. Are they in break correct for sure? I heard from the back. I think they're for sure.
This week, he goes on his foreign policy trip, travels to Saudi Arabia, to Israel, and to Italy, where he's expected to meet with the Pope and the Vatican. The focus, particularly in those early stops, the fight against ISIS, trying to get back on a path in the Middle East. And of course, the question will be for the United States allies in the region, does this revelation, this bombshell, threaten the president's relations with U.S. allies abroad? He will undoubtedly get some tough questions with some of these meetings who's going to happen with foreign leaders. And typically, Chris, as you know, because you've traveled with former President Obama, presidents typically hold press availabilities when they are abroad. So we anticipate that we will get to ask him some questions during that foreign trip. And likely a lot of them, particularly in the early part, will revolve around this latest controversy. Again, we're waiting for National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster to come to the podium to brief us on the latest developments here. I've been talking to senior administration officials throughout the night and the early morning, and they tell me they're not only concerned about the fallout with allies, but with lawmakers on Capitol Hill as well. Obviously, there has been a sharp backlash.
Can we get doors open or walking in?
Good morning. As you know, the president of Turkey is shortly going to be arriving at the White House. But prior to his arrival, as I promised, General McMaster is going to give an update on the president's trip that starts this Friday. And I know there are some additional questions regarding some news of the day. So without further ado, General McMaster.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, last week we discussed the president's upcoming trip. I promised I'd come back and go through the schedule in more detail. I'm happy to do that today. And Sean tells me there's another topic you might want to talk about as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that after we go through the schedule here. But first of all, Secretary Tillerson will accompany the president for most of the trip, breaking off just before the G7 meeting. And as you know, the trip will begin in Saudi Arabia. It's a historic trip. After an arrival ceremony in Riyadh, the president will have coffee with King Salman, attend a royal banquet, and hold bilateral meetings with the king, the crown prince, and the deputy crown prince. He will also participate in a signing ceremony of several agreements that will further solidify U.S.-Saudi security and economic cooperation. That evening, the president and the first lady will join members of the Saudi royal family for an official dinner. The next day, the president will hold bilateral meetings with Gulf Cooperation Council leaders, as well as broader meetings with all of the Gulf state leaders. In the afternoon, he will meet and have lunch with leaders of more than 50 Muslim countries, where he will deliver an inspiring yet direct speech on the need to confront radical ideology and his hopes, the president's hopes, for a peaceful vision of Islam to dominate across the world. The speech is intended to unite the broader Muslim world against common enemies of all civilization and to demonstrate America's commitment to our Muslim partners. The president will then participate in the inauguration of a new center intended to fight radicalism and promote moderation. By establishing and operating this center, our Muslim friends, including Saudi Arabia, are taking a firm stand against extremism and those who use a perverted interpretation of religion to advance their criminal and political agendas. The president also looks forward to participating in a Twitter forum with young people who will be able to live tweet his remarks to people all over the world. The president will then continue on to Jerusalem, where he will meet with President Rivlin and lay a wreath at Yad Vashem. The president will then deliver remarks at the Israel Museum and celebrate the unique history of Israel and of the Jewish people, while reaffirming America's unshakable bond with our closest ally in the Middle East. Later that day, he will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. That night, the president and the First Lady will join the Prime Minister and Mrs. Netanyahu for a private dinner. The following morning, the president will meet President Abbas in Bethlehem, where he will convey his administration's eagerness to facilitate an agreement that ends the conflict. And he will urge Palestinian leaders to take steps that will help lead to peace. And he will visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and say a prayer at the Western Wall. In Rome the next day, the president will have an audience with the Pope at the Vatican. He looks forward to celebrating the rich contributions of Catholics to America and to the world, and to discussing a range of issues of mutual concern, some of which I summarized last time. Before leaving the Vatican, the president will meet the Cardinal Secretary of State and will tour St. Peter's. Later that afternoon, the president will meet with the King and the Prime Minister of Belgium and the heads of state and government of the host country to the NATO alliance. He'll also meet President Mattarella before departing Rome for Brussels. The next morning, the president will travel to the EU headquarters to meet with the presidents of the European Union and of the European Council. He'll then hold a working lunch with the newly elected president of France, whom he will meet in person for the first time. That afternoon, the president will deliver remarks at the unveiling of NATO's memorial to our shared struggle in front of a piece of the Berlin Wall and a segment of the World Trade Center. He will reaffirm America's commitment to the alliance and repeat his insistence that for the good of the alliance, all members must share responsibility and share burden. Joined by Secretary Mattis, he will participate in the NATO leaders meeting and dinner before then traveling to Sicily for the G7. Throughout the summit, he will meet bilaterally with leaders, including the Italian Prime Minister. In the formal meetings, he will press America's economic agenda and call for greater security cooperation. On the first night of the summit, he will also attend a concert performed by the La Scala Philharmonic Orchestra, followed by a leaders' dinner hosted by the President of Italy. Before departing Italy for home, the President will speak to American and Allied servicemen and women and their families. He will thank them for their sacrifices they all make to keep us safe, and he'll also recap the highlights and accomplishments of the trip. And so I'll ask Sean to call on any of you who have questions. Thanks.
General McMaster.
Thanks a lot, General McMaster. You came out to the stakeout area yesterday, and coming out to the stakeout area, you said that the Washington Post story, which came out late yesterday afternoon, was false. Do you stick by that assertion? Do you think that every element of that story is false, and do you have anything to correct in terms of what you said at the podium yesterday afternoon?
No, I stand by my statement that I made yesterday. What I'm saying is really the premise of that article is false, that in any way the president had a conversation that was inappropriate or that resulted in any kind of lapse in national security. And so I think the real issue, and I think what I'd like to see really debated more, is that our national security has been put at risk by those violating confidentiality and those releasing information to the press that could be used connected with other information available to make American citizens and others more vulnerable.
General, was classified information released? General, was classified information released?
Sir, can you tell us if the Prime Minister Netanyahu would join President Trump at the Western Wall? And does the President believe that the Western Wall is part of Israel?
Part of his what? I'm sorry. No Israeli leaders will join President Trump to the Western Wall. He's going to the Western Wall mainly in connection with the theme to connect with three of the world's great religions and to advance, to pay homage at each of these religious sites that he's visiting, but also to highlight the theme that we all have to be united against what are really the enemies of all civilized people, and that we have to be joined together with an agenda of tolerance and moderation.
General, I just want to try to dig into some details of this reporting on the president's conversations with the Russians. Are you denying that he revealed information that was given to the U.S. by an intelligence partner?
So what we don't do is discuss what is and what wasn't classified. What I will tell you is in the context of that discussion, what the president discussed with the foreign minister was wholly appropriate to that conversation and is consistent with the routine sharing of information between the president and any leaders with whom he's engaged.
And the U.S. received from an intelligence partner?
I'm not going to be the one to confirm that sort of information that could jeopardize our security.
U.S. allies that do have these type of intelligence sharing relationships with the U.S. will stop providing that information?
No, I'm not concerned at all. That conversation was wholly appropriate to the conversation, and I think wholly appropriate what the expectations are of our intelligence partners.
If I can follow on that, General, have you reached out to foreign partners who might have contributed such information to the U.S. and talked to them about it, tried to reassure them? If so, what was their reaction?
I have not, and I'm not sure what conversations have been held about that.
Carol.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, if there was nothing that the president shared that he shouldn't have shared, why did his counterterrorism advisor contact the NSA and the CIA about what he had said?
You know, I would say maybe from an overabundance of caution, but I'm not sure. I mean, I've not talked to Mr. Bossert about that, about why he reached out.
There, so what presumably you would understand why there was a reason to reach out.
Sure, I was in the room. The Secretary of State was in the room, as you know. The Deputy Assistant, the Deputy Advisor for National Security, Dina Powell for Strategy, was in the room, and none of us felt in any way that conversation was inappropriate.
General, thanks, Sean. General, if you can tell us, when was the decision made to share that information with the Russians? Did the president spontaneously, on the spot, decide to give that information over? Or was there an interagency process or some kind of formal decision-making process in advance of that meeting with the Russians last week?
Well, as you know, the president, it's wholly appropriate for the president to share whatever information he thinks is necessary to advance the security of the American people. That's what he did. As to your question on had that information been shared previously, I'm not sure about that.
When did he make that decision, though, sir?
When did he make the decision?
When did he make the decision to share the information?
He made the decision in the context of the conversation, which was wholly appropriate. So let's just, I think it's worth recapping one thing here. The president was meeting with the foreign minister about the terrorist threat. He had also raised some difficult issues. What we expected in terms of different behavior from Russia in key areas like Ukraine and as in Syria. But then the president was emphasizing, hey, we have some common interests here. We have to work together in some critical areas. And we have an area of cooperation with transnational terrorist organizations, ISIS in particular, an organization that had already taken down a Russian airliner and murdered over 200 people in October of 2015. And so this was the context of a conversation in which it was wholly appropriate to share what the threat was as a basis for common action and coordination and cooperation.
Did you make a decision in the moment then, during the context of that conversation?
Excuse me. I want to follow up first with Jennifer's question, which you didn't answer about the Western Wall being part of Israel.
Oh, that sounds like a policy decision for, and that's the president's intention. And I did answer the question in terms of what his intention is and where do you go with Israeli officials. The president's intention is to visit these religious sites to highlight the need for unity among three of the world's great religions, unity in confronting a very grave threat to all civilization, and unity in embracing an agenda of tolerance.
Can I finish? Can I get to the question that I had, please? Did the president reveal a city? And that, I mean, the spin is that the president revealed the name of the city, and that gave away information that undermined an ally.
Okay, I will answer that. Okay, so all of you are very familiar with the threat from ISIS. All of you are very familiar with the territory it controls. If you were to say, hey, from where do you think a threat might come from territory that ISIS controls, you would probably be able to name a few cities, I would think. And so it was nothing that you would not know from open source reporting in terms of a source of concern. And it had all to do with operations that are already ongoing, have been made public for months.
Sorry, back to my question, sir. Was this information that was shared with the Russians also the same content that was shared with our allies? And specific to this threat, which the president says was in relation to airlines, is this an imminent threat? Was there a justification for, in that moment, needing to share it with the Russians?
Yeah, I don't want to get into specifics of what exact information is shared with what exact allies, but information on this topic of the threat to aviation was shared with multiple allies. And as you know, there are already policies being put in place to protect against that threat. And you and many others have reported widely on this.
Something that our allies did not. Is that what you were saying?
In terms of the specifics, I have no basis for comparison on what was shared with what country. But I will tell you that it was our impression of all of us that were in the meetings, I've mentioned already, that what was shared was wholly appropriate given the purpose of that conversation and the purpose of what the president was trying to achieve through that meeting.
General, when you came out after the story broke, you said that the president did not disclose any sources or methods. He did not reveal anything about military operations. Why were you denying things that were not even reported? What the report said is that the president revealed classified information that had been shared by one of our allies in the Middle East. So the question is simply a yes or no question here. Did the president share classified information with the Russians in that meeting?
And as I mentioned already, we don't say what's classified, what's not classified. What I will tell you again is that what the president shared was wholly appropriate. The story combined what was leaked with other information and then insinuated about sources and methods. So I wanted to make clear to everybody that the president in no way compromised any sources or methods in the course of this conversation.
General, you do say, though, that national security has been put at risk by the leak of this. Do you have any idea how this got out, and what steps are you taking by virtue of discovering this, as you did, to try to limit the potential for any more leaks of national security information?
I think national security is put at risk by this leak and by leaks like this. And there are a number of instances where this has occurred. And I think it's important to investigate these sort of things and to make sure that we have trusted organizations across our government that allows for the free sharing of information and collaboration. I mean, in terms of national security, what is critical is that you can assemble the experts you need. You want a bigger group, right, for any of these complex problems because you need their expertise. You need the tools that they bring to bear from different agencies and departments. And so what we really have to do is make sure we have a very high degree of confidence in all of our organizations and all of our systems and processes so we can do what we need to do for the president, which is give him our best advice and give him options to deal with these very complex problems.
Clearly, you can't have that confidence by virtue of what happened yesterday. So do you have an idea of how this got out, and how can you tighten up the ship, as it were, to ensure, from your perspective at least, that this stuff doesn't get out?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us to bring in the people with the right authorities and the right mandate to take a look at how this leak occurred and how other breaches may have occurred as well.
General McMaster. Thank you. General McMaster, to put a finer point on it, is there now an active investigation into how this information was leaked? And can you tell us about who's running that investigation? And I also would like to ask you, given that President Trump is now going to be meeting face-to-face with literally dozens of foreign leaders. If there are sensitivities to his discretion in what sort of information to decide to declassify, how is that something that you are advising him ahead of this foreign trip?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are no sensitivities in terms of me or anybody who's been with the president and with many of these engagements. He shares information in a way that is wholly appropriate. And I should just make maybe the statement here that the president wasn't even aware, of where this information came from. He wasn't briefed on the source or method of the information either. So I'm sorry, this is going to have to be the last question because we do have the president of Turkey coming, I think momentarily. Thank you very much.
Contradict you. He contradicts you, General. We have more questions, General.
Will you release the transcripts, Sean?
General? Who's investigating the leaks?
A suspected felon on foot in Alamogordo on September 2nd, 2016. Officer Corvinus is survived by his daughter. Deputy Sheriff Ryan Sean Thomas of Valencia County Sheriff's Department was responding to a call for service on December 6, 2016, when his patrol car left the roadway between Los Lunas and Belen and overturned, and he was ejected from his car. He is survived by his wife, daughter, and a baby boy after he died. Sheriff Stephen Lawrence Ackerman of the Lee County Sheriff's Department was killed in a single accident crash near Encino on January 17, 2017. Sheriff Ackerman had served with the Lee County Sheriff's Department for 14 years and previously with the Lee County Detention Center for 12 years. He is survived by his wife, daughter, son, and grandson. And police officer Houston James Largo of the Navajo Tribal Police was shot while responding to a domestic violence call near Pruitt, New Mexico. He passed away the next day on March 12, 2017. He was only 27 years old. There are no words to express the sadness or the gratitude that we all feel towards these New Mexico officers and their families, and toward all police officers who are killed in the line of duty. We honor them all this police week. And by legislation we introduced last week in the Senate to extend flying the flag half-staff to first responders. We will push to give first responders the respect they are owed by passing Honoring Hometown Heroes Act. Every day, tens of thousands of policemen and policewomen serve our communities in myriad ways, from tracking down violent criminals to finding shelter for homeless persons. The police and their families deserve our respect, gratitude, and support every day. And so I thank you, Officer Chavez, Officer Corvinus, Deputy Sheriff Thomas, Sheriff Ackerman, and Officer Largo, from the bottom of my heart and with sincere appreciation. Mr. President, I would ask that my next statement be put at a different place in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the White House and President Trump face yet another crisis, perhaps the biggest in his chaotic term so far. According to the Washington Post and other outlets, President Trump disclosed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister and Russian ambassador to the U.S. in the Oval Office last week. This is utterly stunning. Congress needs to find out exactly what happened on a bipartisan basis. But we can tell already that President Trump's behavior in this incident is very dangerous. Dangerous to our national security institutions, dangerous to the men and women overseas who are serving their country and risking their lives. Many other outlets have confirmed the Washington Post article, and they have cited several sources. Assuming it's true, the President has endangered our relationship with the partner who gave our security agencies this information. That has ripple effects that will risk similar relationships with other countries. It also could put our sources at risk. While his national security team denied the news reports this morning, the President is on Twitter contradicting them. He claims he has the right to tell the Russian foreign minister anything he wants. Mr. President, I can't think of any parallel in history for the President's dangerous lack of discretion or his dangerous misunderstanding of how to handle classified national security information. As the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Corker put it this way: the White House is in, and I quote, a downward spiral. That's what Senator Corker said, and he said it needs to get under control. Senator Corker is a senior Republican. I know the presiding officer and I serve with him on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's a man I respect very much, and I hope the White House will listen to Chairman Corker. It's very strange that the President chooses to meet with the Russian ambassador at the center of the Trump campaign's contacts to Russia, or to allow the Russian press with their electronic equipment into the meeting at the Oval Office. But let's put these strange and dangerous events in the context of the last several weeks and months. Americans' intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia interfered in the U.S. election and that they favored the Trump campaign. Now the President is hosting senior Russian officials in the Oval Office and describing